everyone. Welcome back to the Field Advisor podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield today, joined by Matt Reardon. Matt, back in springtime. Well, how do they say it? Meteorological spring.
Yep.
That's a mouthful. So what date does spring technically begin? I believe it's towards the end of March, right?
Yeah, so it's going to begin on the spring equinox here in like 3 weeks. But meteorological spring, to me, it makes more sense, the meteorological designations for the season. So like winter starts December 1st. It just like makes sense to me. Like by December 21st, we've already had snow. It's already cold. Like it's not fall anymore as you're like planning for the holidays and buying Christmas presents. So I think the same thing as spring. Like March 1st is a great start to spring. We've had this huge warm up here this week, had a little bit of a warm up like 2 weeks ago, and I'm ready to move on into spring. I think the conversation shifted into spring. Why wait another 3 weeks?
Yeah. I switched out all my snowman decorations yesterday. So I said, if it's anyone's fault that it snowed, it's not mine because I put away my snowman decorations.
Yeah,
So,
I just found a Christmas holiday wreath that we left up on our front door after we took down all our decorations. I took that down yesterday as well, officially between the two of us into spring.
yes. Okay, well, you have the drought monitor pulled up. Of course, drought on everyone's minds. I've been hearing for a while, livestock farmers having to haul water for a long time. Creeks are dry. When I was doing my research in preparation for this, I wanted to go find some statistics because I think people know it's dry. It's very dry. But what are people saying? So here's some stats I wanted to share with you and share with our audience. So Champaign County has been in extreme drought for 14 consecutive weeks ending January 29th. So we're in early March. So add 4 more weeks on top of that. That's quite a long time to be in the extreme drought range. This marks the longest period since the drought monitor began in 2000. That was from Illinois State climatologist Trent Ford. And then according to the National Weather Service, Lincoln, Illinois had the driest February on record. It was the 8th driest for Peoria, so not as bad. But 3rd driest for Springfield. You go south to Carbondale. You go up north to Chicago and Rockford. So they experienced a very dry month. And then, then Matt, we were talking about Eric earlier. Matt, in your last blog, you said in forecasting, the most important factor is to know where you begin, not where you're headed. So that's where I want to start today, where we're at. Talk us through the drought monitor and any observations and how concerned are you right now with the drought?
Yeah, it's been significant. And I think this drought kind of snuck up on us, not in that it wasn't in the pretty color territory at the end of last year, but we've just been so used to this like overwintering drought late in fall. It was the same thing, rinse and repeat at the end of 2025. We've seen that so much of this decade. Like 4 of the last 5 years, we've had this drought conversation going through fall after harvest, going into the heart of winter. And the problem with that is, winter is not a great time in Illinois to break a drought. We get snow. That's really not a lot of precipitation melted down. If you get rain on top of snow, it goes right into the river systems. If you get too much snow melt at the same time, that goes right into the hydrology and you miss some of that and the soil. So kind of any way we slice it, we're seriously lacking moisture in the soil. We can see that satellite estimates from soil. Might have one of those pulled up here. If we look at root zone soil moisture, it's kind of a percentage of deviation from where it typically is around this time in early March. And across central Illinois, like I-74, between I-72, bracketing I-55, I-57, it is dry. And like you said, people hauling water. I've had farmers tell me that people are hauling water that weren't in 2012. And as like somebody who came up in this during 2012, that shocks me. It's been that dry. So does it concern me? Yes, it's an immediate concern. Frankly, it concerns me a little bit less right now than it did 2 weeks ago because we have just so much rain in the forecast to talk about.
Hopefully. I'm hoping it pans out. Talk about that just a little bit because yes, there's rain potential. We've talked about rain potential before, but for me, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, so this was a long forecast about a week ago where we thought things were going to start tilting on the wetter side. But I think at this point, we're pretty reliable that we're going to get some rainfall in here at this point, certainly over the next 7 days. And I always like when you can kind of stack them on top of each other. That way, if you miss one, you're going to get another one. So pretty reliable rainfall forecast south of I-72, south of I-74, looking at like 1-2 inches plus of rain through the end of this weekend into early next week. Let's take this all the way out into Wednesday. That next 7-day period, is looking friendly for rainfall. I'll try to pull up some of this here. One way you kind of track this is looking at the 7-day forecast for precipitation anomalies. I mentioned I-74, I-72 south. I mean, well above average for every county south of there. Got a lot of big growing regions in that corridor there. That first map we're looking at, that's the next 7 days. Well, take me out to the 7 days beyond that, 8 to 14 days. I scroll down to that territory. You're wet across the whole state of Illinois. Now, Kelsey, you're right to be a little bit skeptical. When you get further out in these forecasts, they're not as reliable, but I love stacking them up week to week. And frankly, even maybe looking a little bit beyond like 15th, 16th, 17th. I just looked today at the latest data. We won't put too much weight into this. We're not going to Sharpie it down right now, but I see another trough coming through. And if trough in mid-March means rain for Illinois.
So I'm seeing this as the Euro model, correct? Do you like to follow the Euro model over the GFS?
Well, when we add them up at the end of the year, kind of big totals, the European model, ECMWF, commonly called the Euro, it does perform a little bit better. Different accuracy scores measure different things, but it gets about 90% on its test at the end of the year. The GFS, the American model, gets about an 86%. So they're pretty close. They're neck and neck. And I'm never going to give the Euro all the weight in one situation versus the GFS. And that was actually proven just recently here, the big nor'easter that dropped 40 inches of snow in parts of Rhode Island. The GFS won that race. It picked up on that storm quicker than the European model did. And the European model actually had to catch up and cave back to the more correct GFS solution. So I do show the European model because I know at the end of the year, all else equal, it's going to perform a little bit better. But I always tell people, look at both. See if they agree. If they agree, your confidence on that event can go up. If they disagree, well, you're tracking some uncertainty there. Maybe lean toward the Euro, just as past experience as a guide.
A win for America. We'll take it.
Exactly.
I think one of the biggest questions I have, and it's a loaded question, is what's going to take us out of this drought? I mean, you're showing the rain chances, precipitation chances for the next 2 weeks, but I mean, does anyone really know what it takes to get us out of drought? Like how much rain? I don't know. That's my biggest question.
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into the drought monitor. Trent Ford being somebody who contributes to that, as far as I know. So they factor a lot of different things in. They track, things like hydrology, soil moisture, dry days in terms of consecutive dry days. They factor in, if there's crops in the ground or not. They factor how much evapotranspiration. There's all these different kind of things that they track. And so it's hard to say, well, this number is going to get us out of the drought. Materially, for growing a crop, I mean, the long-term drought concern, it's going to go away pretty quick. We're going to get this water into the ground. For folks south of I-72, you're looking at 2+ inches over the next 7 days and potentially another inch or two on top of that. So you get your March's worth of rainfall in about a 2-week period. That's going to wetten up those soils going into planting. Folks who are trying to get in at the end of the month, I know there's always some I hear about, they're going to have that moisture in the ground, barring, just a monumental forecast bust. At this point, I don't see a way out of all this rainfall for folks to the south. Now, you'll notice it took us scrolling to the bottom of this page to show the rainfall for the northern half of the state. So that's a little bit tentative, right? We got to get out into next week to make sure we deliver on that. But every which model I look at, I mean, however you want to look at it, we're increasing the rainfall chances across the state of Illinois. This one from the National Weather Service, their WPC product, just showing the next 7 days of rainfall. And the values across the southern tier of the state, I mean, you're looking in excess of 2 inches. And I expect Chicago, areas to the west of that, to get up over a ½ inch, and they'll take it. We've been dry.
Speaking of just looking at the overall climate, I mentioned to you earlier, I watched your colleague Eric Snodgrass on U.S. Farm Report earlier, and they were talking about transitioning into El Niño. It could be strong. What does that really mean?
Yeah, great question. So often in winter, say at least more so in winter, especially on the West Coast, we always track INSO. That is, are we in a La Nina? Are we in El Nino? Or are we in between? We call that neutral. And all we're talking about, I'll bring up our latest sea surface temperatures here from NASA. All we're talking about when we're talking about La Nina or El Nino are water temperatures, the surface of the ocean, in the central tropical Pacific. So like right here, right smack dab in the middle of this map, well west of South America, well east of Australia. If those water temperatures are cooler than average, there's that cold patch there, as you can see here in early March, we're in a La Nina. And that's where we've been in winter. And whether we're in a La Nina or El Nino gives us some predictive power, more so in winter than it does in summer. Unfortunately, we would take more predictive power during the middle of the growing season, but it just works out. The jet stream's stronger in winter. It has more predictive impacts with how La Nina or El Nino might influence it. And that predictive power worked out really well this winter. We had a lot of cold east. We had a lot of snow east. And you start backing up toward the west, we had less snowfall and more of that drought concern. That's not uncommon. and La Nina winters. But what you're looking at here is a map in early March. That cold patch that I advertised, it is dwindling quickly. And Eric and I have been pouring through the data, and we can't find a year where a La Nina has weakened as quickly as this one. Usually we see this kind of weaken slowly throughout spring, March, April, May. We're at the point here where I would expect in the latest Climate Prediction Center update here in just about a week that this La Nina, the book will be closed, will officially enter ENSO neutral. If not in a week, certainly by early April. There's just no cold water left in the Atlantic. You're seeing the last remnants of this cold patch. And look at the water temperature over here by the Galapagos, like just off the coast of South America. It's warming up rapidly. That's a hallmark of these kind of early El Nino signatures. And what you can't see here is underneath the ocean, which we know is very warm as well. So I'm looking for any indication that we're not going to be in El Nino in 2026, and I can't find one.
So what does that mean in terms of forecasts? Are you able to grab anything from that to tell us, are we going to be in a prolonged drought with these bits of rainfall or more rainfall?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, the lack of predictive power starts to creep in summer with respect to La Nina, El Nino. There's summer correlations with rainfall are about 0.2, 0.3. That's not a home run. You're not going to bank the savings account or the farm on a 0.2 or 0.3 correlation, but it's a lean in one direction. It's starting to lean that way. And all else equal with El Nino, and what could be a strong one here, is we tend to have better precipitation in the warmest months in these El Nino summers, which looks like we're heading to that point right now. So it makes me feel better. Is it me saying the drought risk is gone? We don't have to worry about drought anymore in 2026? No. If I knew exactly where that was going in the middle of 2026, if I could paint you right now the drought monitor as it looked on August 3rd this year, right, that'd be very powerful data. Could probably trade some sort of commodities or derivative out of Chicago or whatnot, and just pile in the cash, knowing exactly what weather's going to play out. So it doesn't work like that. There's no home run in this science, but it's certainly leaning that way. There's implications for where we might go in fall, or we might go in next winter. These El Ninos usually last through the next winter. That's going to have significant impacts, we would think, on the western U.S., whose correlations are perhaps the strongest with some of these strong El Nino events. And it also could impact our hurricane season. We know that during these El Nino episodes, particularly strong ones, Atlantic hurricane activity is suppressed. So maybe in 2026, not as much hurricane activity. And we've seen a lot of that in prior years.
So let's bring it back to March. You mentioned something about the temperatures. So we've been talking about rainfall or dryness. What temp wise? I mean, we're sitting here first week of March, and boy, I hear 70 degrees by Friday. Is that going to continue?
Yeah, for so much of winter, we've just had a trough kind of parked across the Midwest, if not over the East Coast. We've been cold. We've had these kind of brutal shots of Arctic air come in. Those have been punctuated by these kind of brief warm-ups, and we've seen more of that warming up here in spring. Well, let's call it getting near spring, officially entering it 48 hours ago. And we have that ridging here. That's that kind of warm color bar. You can see those higher heights that are spreading across the Midwest here this week. I'll play this forecast forward. And you'll notice this little notch, this little filament here over Kansas. Let's call it that. That's our trough to our west right now. That's actually helping to kick off some of the showers that we're seeing already here this week. As that cuts across here tomorrow and then Thursday, that rainfall is really going to pick up. You throw these little troughs right through these warm spring March air masses, they're going to rain. That's why the forecast has been so confident. That's why it's so wet. I'll play this forecast through Thursday into Friday. Here comes another one. It's like a parade. Little bit of a break this weekend, maybe a little bit of a moderation in those temperatures when a cold front comes through. But next week, that ridging comes back. Now by Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, we have a much deeper trough, i.e. more potent, i.e. more precip coming through next week. So I'm looking for ways that we're not going to get this rain. The forecast is going to go wrong. And again, kind of like El Nino, I just don't see it. We're going to get rain. We're going to be wet over the next 10 days over Illinois. I'm rooting for, not too much. There are some flood risks, I think, as you get into Southeast Illinois, kind of cutting over to Indiana, areas that could see in a 4 to 5 day time period, 4 or 5 inches plus of rain. You start stressing things a little bit, especially on top of cold soils that aren't necessarily primed to reabsorb all that as we get into early spring.
I was going to say, are we done with the snow?
That I'm not quite sure of, because if I take now, anytime
I think many people are wanting you to say yes.
Yeah, and myself included. If I drag this forecast all the way out, and we always got to, you got to be careful doing this because you get further out, Kelsey, these forecasts get less accurate. But I see more of those troughs coming through. They look a little bit deeper. If I play these forecasts for temperatures out, these are 5-day rolling windows. Warm over the next 5 days, warm next week. But you'll notice I get out into mid-February, February 13th, 14th, and 15th. I think we drop back colder in the middle to latter part of the month. Maybe that third week of March, You bring temperatures back down, we get below freezing at night, and you're still having these troughs come through. That rain snow line, which next week is up by like Minneapolis, is going to come south to like Madison. You get out to like mid-March, maybe that's sneaking down by like I-80. Does it get further south than that to I-72, I-74? I can't roll that out. Mm-hmm. So I think that third week of March, winter might make its kind of last stand if these models are to believed right now. Obviously, plenty of uncertainty with that 2 weeks out, but that's the signal that we're seeing in a lot of these long-range models.
Anything else you haven't mentioned, Matt, in terms of either the drought or looking at the March outlook?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest one is things look wet not only in the near term, but in the long term. So we jump over and look at something like the ECMWF extended forecast, which allows us to peer into late March and early April, obviously with the caveat that some of these long-range forecasts aren't quite as accurate. But even those, telegraphing a lot more moisture for the Ohio River Valley down into the Tennessee Valley. I mean, these are areas that lacked a lot of wintertime precipitation. In fact, if you draw a line from like Little Rock up to like Decatur, some of the worst precipitation deficits that we've had this winter, and that area is looking wet. And I think about two things when I see April rainfall in that quarter, if it comes to fruition. One, too much of it, you're going to have planting issues. Just obviously, we saw that. Last year was the banner year for significant planting, pre-plant issues kind of in that quarter there through the Mid-South, even up into Southern Illinois, Kentucky, Paducah, et cetera. So we get too much moisture in there. Suddenly the conversation goes from drought to flood. And it does that so easily in that part of the world. So often that we flip from one to the other. It's never this gradual change. Why that is, I'm not quite sure. I have theories on it, but we know it happens a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again this April, unfortunately. The silver lining, if we stay wet to the south of us in Illinois going into summer, and I call this kind of the Little Rock Memphis rule or Little Rock Nashville rule, if that line there, that commute stays wet, the ground stays wet, there's a lot of trees, the soil's permeable, that moisture gets back up into the atmosphere, and we can recycle that on a south wind and push that right up into the middle of the Corn Belt here and sort of recycle our own moisture back from the south. So if they go crazy wet like they did in 2025, our drought risk just starts to come down because we have this other moisture. It's almost, we call it like the brown ocean effect. It's almost like there's this big brown ocean to the south of us, adding to the Gulf, allowing more moisture to get up into the atmosphere. We'll use that for thunderstorms, sometimes severe. We'll use that for extra rainfall events come June and July where we'll need them.
So I want to bring up dust storms because that's been a huge concern the past couple of years that we've seen throughout the state of Illinois. What makes the risk of dust storms greater? I assume staying in this drought, but getting some of this rainfall would help, correct?
Well, yes and no. The dust that we saw last year in 2025, so much of that was, and this is the exact opposite word used, was precipitated by drought for the southern plains and the Southwest. So they had a lack. They had too much evaporation. They had too much dust kind of sitting here in early spring, particularly March and April, right over areas like western Oklahoma, western Texas, West Kansas, even New Mexico. And then we had these big deep low pressure systems. Kelsey, remember how windy it was?
Yes, I was just thinking about the wind. Yeah.
And so we had these big lows coming through this high pressure gradient, temperature gradient right through the middle part of the country. And so we were just taking that dust on these strong winds to our southwest and bring them all the way up over Illinois. I can remember days where the sky turned that like weird, like dirty color. And it came down in some of the rain. The rain would fall on your car and evaporate. It would leave that like dust.
Dirt. It was dirt.
It's dirt. That wasn't coming from Illinois or even Missouri or Arkansas. That was coming from further southwest, traveling hundreds of miles all the way on our way here. Now, hey, we'll take their topsoil if they want to donate it to us. But that dust was coming from elsewhere. We actually are seeing hints that you can see right here in this long range forecast. Part of the country might go dry again in 2026. We've seen that in some of these kind of El Nino transition years. And it's always kind of a good bet, unfortunately, for folks in the high plains that they're going to be dealing with drought in spring. It just happens so often, time and time again, with how hot and how quickly they can get hot without much vegetation there. So that was really kind of the impetus for the dust storms. Also, just kind of looking at this map, my mind thinks if we're wet in a lot of these locations in April, we're probably seeing severe episodes through some of these same corridors. So if this comes to fruition, it's hard to get a lot of rain in April without severe weather. I mean, if you have flow coming through, if you have moisture, dew point, you add some shear to that. That part of the country, that part of the world, we're pretty good at making severe wind and tornadoes, unfortunately. So something to keep an eye on as we transition toward April. If we're on the wetter side, might be on the siren side as well.
We had a couple of storms come through mid to end of February, correct, in the state?
Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting winter because as it's been cold at times, even like Arctic cold, we've had I was sitting there in the middle of that, like the worst of the Arctic blast at the beginning of January. Temperatures finally fell all the way down kind of during the middle part of the month. And, we're sitting there shivering, temperatures down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit over and over and over again. There's got snow on top of that. And it just baked in that cold for like 2 or 3 weeks. And somebody came up to me and said, gosh, are we ever going to like have storms and warm air again? And I'm like, well, this is going to sound crazy, but we just did like 2 or 3 weeks ago at the end of December had tornadoes. They broke in on the nightly news, right? For tornadoes over near like Decatur, up near Kankakee as well. One crossed the interstate there, and then again recently here. So it's interesting. As crazy as winter can be, you can still get severe thunderstorms any time of the year. I can remember tornado outbreaks in the state that occurred in November back in, I think, 2013, and then in December as well, at the end of the last decade as well. So got to be vigilant all year long, but that vigilance should increase in April and May. Those are our peak months, and when I think we'll probably start seeing that higher degree of activity this year.
So speaking of more activity, I did see on X from the National Weather Service that it's Illinois Severe Preparedness Week. And I'm curious, farmers always like to have the latest apps or radars. I know I was introduced to Radar Scope when I had Eric Snodgrass as my lecturer at the University of Illinois. Is there anything that new technology-wise that you're recommending to farmers to have on their phones or anything else as we prepare for storm season?
Yeah, the resources that are out there right now are pretty fantastic. So the EMA alerts, those are the things that make your phone go crazy, right? When there's some of these alerts. Often this part of the country, most people get them for tornado warnings or particularly dangerous severe thunderstorm warnings, which we want people to treat like tornado warnings because the winds are so high that buildings start to become at risk as well. So those are probably your best way. Keep your phone charged or it's not going to go off if your phone's dead. And then some people, unfortunately, because either they've been false alarmed in the past. I believe the email alerts might go out for some other government emergencies. Maybe they go and turn them off because they go off and annoy them. Then you're not going to get that alert that eventually could save you. So I recommend people don't turn them off. I think you're opted in by default. So you'd have to go into the settings to turn them off. So that's probably the best one. The surest way, again, if you're at home at night, that's always our biggest concern. Unfortunately, we see injuries and frankly, fatalities increase at night just by the simple fact people are asleep. They're not paying attention. And more often than not, on the second floor, if they have the option available, is where they put their bedroom. Those are two bad combinations of things when a big thunderstorm is coming through with a tornado threat. So have two ways to get a warning. Use your phone, but also think about a weather radio or something of that nature. Because if you're asleep, you might not hear sirens and you're not going to be watching the TV, so you're not going to get it that way as well. And then keep that phone charged, especially on nights where severe weather's coming. You hear the news talking about it. You hear us talking about it. Have those things charged. Have your weather radio charged up, and tell folks that, hey, tonight's a night where maybe you cancel plans, maybe pay attention to the weather a little bit more, make sure your phone is charged. Reach out to me if you need anything.
Weather radios, do you still see a lot of people using those, or do they just use their phone instead?
Yeah, the radios are nice because it's just an extra layer. We always want people to have multiple layers of security. That's why we tell you to go to the interior part of your house into a bathroom, because we know you have the most walls around you. Sure, one wall might do it, but we'd rather have you at 2 or 3. So your phone you might be able to rely on, but maybe you didn't get the latest software update. I know mine keeps bugging me to do it at night, and it doesn't go off for some reason. So I have that second way to get it. Sirens aren't really designed to be heard indoors unless you're really close to one. So often people think, well, I'll always hear the siren. Our data shows that they don't when it matters, especially at night.
Mm-hmm. I live on the edge of town, and it depends on which direction the wind's blowing for me to hear that siren. So it's not always a guarantee. Matt, anything else we didn't cover today in terms of the weather outlook or the drought? It kind of seems to me it's just a wait and see, which it always is with weather. But I believe everyone should get out there and do their rain dance, and hopefully this forecast comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, just the two things I just don't see a way out at this point. It's going to be wet. We're going to get rainfall in the state here across almost every single county. I think it's going to be above average over the next 10 days. So that rainfall is coming. That's going to try to change this conversation going into late March, early April, where I think we have enough moisture in the ground. I will say temperature conversation is a little bit odd because in some of the years that look similar to this one, we actually had relatively chilly Aprils and even early May. So as much as this water might prime the soils a little bit, we're going to have to keep an eye on that long range forecast, obviously for frost risk. So we're starting to get into last frost date season here, right? Over the next few weeks, the median date is April 14th. Some of these recent years, we've been pushing that out to the end of April, if not early May. So that might be something we have to watch again this year if the data holds true.
And how can I forget daylight savings time starts this Sunday? So
That's
more sunlight, longer days. I'm sure everyone's ready for it, except for maybe the shorter mornings that we'll get for a while.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Matt. We'll talk to you again here in a month.
Perfect, Kelsey. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor Podcast. Unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor Podcast on your favorite podcast platform.